This works for anybody. This works for people with IBS, without IBS. Doesn't matter how severe or non-severe your issues are. These are like the basics for gut health that I've found in the last 2-3 years of having all sorts of crazy issues with my gut. This video is not about what you should or shouldn't eat. As a rule, there's some guidelines for what you should and shouldn't eat, but regardless of your diet, there are things you can do that will significantly help your digestion. We're gonna start out with some basic, easier ones that you've probably heard before, but they're still really important, and I'm gonna go into the details about why they matter so much. Number one, the biggest, most obvious one is eat more veggies, and by more I mean at least 4 servings. When I track my actual food, I found on an average day I don't even get 4 servings of veggies, so that's a big problem. And when I do try really hard to get my veg up and eat at least 4 to 5 servings, there's a huge difference. And there's a couple reasons why. It's not just because veggies are good for you. They are, obviously, but the number one thing is they give you fiber, which moves things along. Everyone knows this. So the biggest thing that having 1 to 2 bowel movements a day is amazing for is your bloating goes way down. Because think about it, if you have 1 to 2 bowel movements a day, you're never having more than 2 to 3 meals worth of food sitting in your digestive tracts, and you're gonna have less bulk there, so you're gonna have less bloating, less opportunity for bloating, less stuff for your bad bacteria to ferment and cause gas and have all the problems. Yes, if you're healthy, your gut should move things along on its own, but if you don't have the fiber there, it's gonna take a lot longer than it should. So supposedly, if you're at like tip-top health and you're eating everything right, like as soon as you're done with that meal, you should have a bowel movement, and you should never have more than 1 meal's worth of food in your system at any time. I thought that was crazy when I first heard it, because before I started getting into gut health, I only had a bowel movement every other day, which is really bad. So imagine how many meals were just sitting inside me, rotting, essentially, because you absorb most of the nutrients, I've heard, in the first couple hours of digestion, and then it's just in there, and your body just pulls out the last little bits. Like you get water content from it, you get the last couple bits of nutrients in it, and it feeds your microbiome too. Once it's done with the majority of the digestion, it's not worth anything to you anymore. And in fact, it's gonna start fermenting and changing and getting actually bad for you and toxic for you. And that's why it's so horrible to have multiple meals worth of food just sitting inside your system causing problems.
Okay, so I found this article after I filmed this video where they interviewed a gut specialist, and she was saying that the bacteria in your gut normally feed on the fiber, but if the food is in you for too long, the bacteria will eat up all of the fiber available, and then they'll have to turn to other things like protein or even a lining of your gut. And when they are digesting the fiber, the byproducts are beneficial for your gut health, but when they break down the protein, the byproducts are detrimental to your gut health. And of course, once they start breaking down your gut lining, that's extremely detrimental. So it's really interesting to know that it's not just important in terms of fermentation and things going bad, it's also important in terms of the effect it has on your gut bacteria.
Now, you don't have to reach that magic point where every meal you have is followed by a bowel movement, but you should at least be having 1 to 2 bowel movements a day. And it's really hard for me, maybe for you it's easy, but I only can hit that magic number of 1 to 2 times a day if I'm eating a lot of veggies. If you have multiple days worth of food sitting in your gut, it's gonna take up a lot more space. You're probably gonna feel bloated as a default, even if it's all good food and your digestion is on point. Okay, so the next sort of obvious tip that everyone talks about, but very few people actually do, is eating less processed food. You don't have to go zero processed food, but this kind of goes along with the eating more veggies idea. If you try to get in 5 servings of veggies in your day, you're gonna be too full to eat a lot of processed food, honestly. The biggest thing about this is that obviously processed food has very little fiber. Veggies have a lot of fiber, and we talked about the benefits of that, right? So if you're eating a whole lot of processed food in your diet, you're naturally gonna be getting less fiber. Also, you're gonna be getting less micronutrients. A lot of people, including myself, find that, especially if your processed food is high in sugar, that can cause a huge amount of bloating and pain, not to mention skin issues. A lot of people, when they cut sugar out of their diet or they drop it really low, they find that their skin issues clear up. And I think skin issues are directly related to your gut. So sugar is the #1 processed food to cut out. even if it's unrefined sugar, coconut sugar, raw honey, whatever it is, keep it low. Keep it under 15 to 10 grams a day, which I know is really hard. I love sugar, I love sweets. I'm always baking sweet stuff, but it's made a huge difference in my gut health when I cut the sugar down. From my experience, whenever I eat a lot of processed food or unprocessed food that's high in sugar, I get all sorts of flare-ups with either my IBS or just general gut issues, bloating, pain, everything gets worse. So cut those out completely. If you are a saint, if you're a normal human being, just try and keep them as low as possible or save them for special occasions. Number 3, reading off on my list here, guys, I've got so much, is hydration. And I don't just mean drinking water. I tried going on one of those challenges where you drink like a whole gallon of water a day, which for me was, what was it? I didn't do a gallon. I went online and I researched how much water you need for your body weight. And I was drinking that every day for 2 weeks, and I felt better than I had before, but I still feel thirsty all the time. And that's something that doesn't make any sense, right? You think if you're properly hydrated, drinking all the water, you shouldn't feel thirsty. So the next time I saw my doctor, I asked her about it. She said, hydration is not just drinking water. You have to have your electrolytes. And that doesn't mean go out and buy a Gatorade and down that. That's not what we're saying here. Try and get enough salts in your day. People always think salt causes bloating, but if you don't get enough salt, that's a basic electrolyte for survival, so don't go too low on your salt. I always think it's best to go by how your body feels. So if you know you're drinking enough water and you still feel thirsty, go out and get an electrolyte supplement. They make like a little electrolyte drops that have like no sugar or flavoring or anything added. You just add them to your water. And the big thing for that is that your whole digestion process requires water. I find that when I'm dehydrated, it's easy to get constipated. And anytime, and goes back to the first point we were talking about keeping a few meals worth of food in your system as possible. And if you are backed up, it's gonna be harder to move out the old meals and get them out of there. So hydration helps a lot with that. Okay, number 4 is, for me, it's the most important one. I was thinking about putting this first, but it doesn't apply to everybody. It's to figure out what foods you're sensitive to. The biggest one is dairy. So many people think that they can digest dairy fine, and then they cut it out of their diet for a brief period of time. Usually you see videos of people where they went vegan for a month and they felt so much better, and then they stopped being vegan, but they kept the dairy out of their life for a bit and they still felt amazing. And usually that's what happens, and a lot of people see it with their skin. There's a ton of videos on YouTube about how people cleared up their skin, and most of them seem to say they cut dairy out of their diet. It's not for everybody. If you have a lot of European heritage, you probably have a lactase enzyme and you can break down milk just fine. But if you're not majority European descent, you probably don't have enough of that enzyme or any of that enzyme, and so it's gonna be a lot harder for your body to break down milk and any milk products. And that's the biggest thing I've learned about digestion, is if you can't break it down, it's going to cause problems for you. And that actually goes on to number 5, but I'll get to that in a second. So your problem foods are not necessarily something that everyone has problems with. Just because everyone else has problems with dairy doesn't mean that you will. And just because a lot of people have problems with gluten doesn't mean you will. But I think it's definitely worth cutting them out individually from your diet for a bit, especially if you're having pretty severe gut issues. I talk about that in my elimination diet video. So if you have severe gut issues, check that one out, because that's more of my extreme measures, like what you do when you are really, really feeling sick. But for people who just have average bloating and a little bit of pain here and there, cutting out the foods is not, you're not cutting it out for life. You're just cutting it out long enough to see how your body reacts when it doesn't have to deal with those things. So foods that are hard to break down for a lot of people nowadays, at least, are gluten, dairy, and eggs. And if you do have a food sensitivity, it's super, super, super important that you find out as soon as possible and get it out of your diet, because that was what caused my IBS, essentially, is having food sensitivities and eating those problem foods too often. And when you have a food sensitivity and your body can't break that food down properly, the issues start to compound because they start causing damage to your gut lining, and everything goes downhill when that starts. So the beginner stage is you have mild bloating and pain, and then it will get worse from there if you don't take out the food sensitivity. You can have bloating and pain and and have no problems with those specific foods. It could be a completely different food. There could be no foods that you have problems breaking down. That's where all these other tips come into play, is that you need to get your overall digestive ability good and your system working properly. And if none of those things work, then you come back to this and see if you have any food issues. But the reason I put this as number 4 and not the end of the list is because I have IBS and a lot of food sensitivities come with that. So they are like the bane of my existence. I started out with just gluten and dairy, and then I didn't take care of my gut and I started getting new food sensitivities. And the more food sensitivities you have, the easier it is to go into one of those downward spirals where the problems start building and building. But again, if you don't have food sensitivities, don't worry about it. But the way to find out is to pick a 2-week period, minimum 2 weeks, and cut out the problem foods that either you suspect or the main, like the most common problem foods, and see how you feel. And if you feel any better over those 2 weeks, then one of those foods is probably causing you problems. It might not be all of them, but it's probably one of them. If you don't have a specific food sensitivity, like it's gluten or dairy or eggs, but you feel like a lot of the different foods you eat cause you problems, it could be a problem with FODMAPs. I'll put a link in the description box below about what all that is, but basically it's another form of being extra sensitive to certain things in your food. Number 5 is based on improving your overall digestion, and that is, this sounds really basic, but people don't do this anymore. Sit down to eat, chew your food well. So the thing about sitting down is that we digest better when we're in a relaxed state, when we're not focused on anything that stresses us out, when we're not running around doing other things, because digestion requires a lot of energy from your body, and just hormonally your body's in like a better state for digestion. So that also means no mental stresses. So no computer, no work, no phone, nothing to distract you. I don't always follow this. Sometimes, like when I have a super busy day, my only time for relaxation that I schedule in is my meals. And so during my meals, I usually want to watch like YouTube or TV or something. So if it's something that really relaxes you, I don't think that's a horrible idea. I don't think that's a horrible thing, but ideally, you want no distractions when you eat, or at the very least, no stresses. And smelling your food is to activate your salivary glands. I mean, anyone who's walked by a nice smelling restaurant, if you're hungry when you smell it, your mouth starts to water. Your body is meant to do that because you smell food, you're hungry, your body's gonna prep the digestion because it expects you to go get that food and to start eating. That is really necessary because every step of our digestion, from the mouth to the stomach to the small intestines, large intestines, every single step is meant to break down your food a little bit more. And as I talked about before, if your food's not getting broken down, it's going to be causing you problems, including bloating and pain. And so if you are relaxed when you sit down for your food, you smell it, even if it's just like, there, done. You don't have to sit there and be trying to analyze all the different scents, but if you can get some kind of nose activation to trigger your salivary glands, that will help. And then chewing, your saliva has amylase in it, which breaks down carbs. I think it probably has other stuff in it that helps break down your food a bit more, but that step along with your chewing are super important because you want when it gets to your stomach, what's it gonna do? It's gonna be hit by acid and bile. And those things, they can't like dig into the inside of the food and start breaking them down. They can only work on the outside of every little chunk of food. So if you don't chew your food, you have big chunks going in, and the acid and the bile can only break down like the outside edges of it. And so then you have the inside bit not getting fully broken down and going on into your small intestines, where it's harder for your body to deal with because it's not fully broken down. So that's why chewing is super important. I'm really bad at this. I never seem to chew my food properly, and even if I do videos like this telling people to chew their food, when it gets to the actual meal and I'm hungry and I'm distracted because I had a busy day, like everybody, I'm just hungry. I just want to get my food down, and maybe it tastes good. And also, it depends on how you were raised eating. Sometimes this is like undoing years of training, but it helps so much. A little loophole around this is if you are drinking a smoothie that's been properly like blended up, fully blended up, or you have a soup that's been blended or pureed. Those are great if you're having really, really bad stomach pain, but you're still hungry and you still want to eat something, because a lot of The chewing has already been done for you. Your saliva has not been mixed in and started to break it down, but the like mechanical breakdown has already been done for you. So that saves your digestive system a lot of work. I always want to be in the shot. Stay to the end if you want to see this little sneak. Try and get in my shot. My morning wake up shot. You wouldn't let me read my book. Number 6 is getting enough movement in your day. So this is another thing that I was really guilty of until recently. So what was it? Last 3-ish months I've been trying really hard to increase my movement every day. And movement just means basically how many steps you get in a day. Just movement throughout your day is supposed to be low stress, and it promotes your circulation more than anything. And circulation is not just good for you in terms of blood circulation, it's also important for your lymph circulation. Lymph is like your garbage disposal system, your waste disposal system. And so all your cellular waste, everything gets cycled into it. The problem is there's no heart to pump it. He's a bit like a puppy. He needs attention a lot. Don't you? Let's show them. Hello. You need muscle contraction. So just daily movement is supposed to pump your lymph system. So what happens is if you're sedentary, especially really sedentary like I was, your lymph system is not getting circulated properly. And that causes a lot of issues, especially for your gut, because if your lymph is your waste disposal system, where do you think it disposes to? Where do you think the end point is for that? Where the rest of your waste is disposed to. So if you have a backup in your lymph system, it's going to cause a backup or at least a negative effect onto your intestinal tracts. And that just makes things worse. So as I increased my daily steps, my daily activity, things were moving faster, and that's really good because it's when things kind of get stuck and slowed down that we tend to get bloated and backed up and all those problems. So try not to be sedentary if you can. Last one, you almost made it to the end. The number 7 most important thing is getting some probiotics into your diet. This does not have to be the little capsules, the little supplement. Ow. You stop it. Oi. Sit. This does not have to be supplements. You do not have to take supplements. You can take fresh fruit and veg. The basic idea is you have some good bacteria in your gut and you have some bad. If you're having gut issues, it's possible that you have a little bit too many of the bad guys in there. And to balance them out, the best thing to do is there's 2 things. Stop feeding the bad ones. Usually things like sugar and just bad foods that humans shouldn't be eating too much of tend to feed the bad bacteria. That's why people with really healthy diets tend to also have really good gut health. And the second thing is to bring in more of the good guys, right? To repopulate, to try to kill off some of the bad bacteria and repopulate with the good bacteria. On this note, some people think that getting rid of the bad bacteria is easiest with antibiotics. Antibiotics can save your life. There's a lot of situations when they're necessary. If they are not super necessary, please do not take them. They will wipe out everything in your microbiome, the good and the bad. And a lot of the good bacteria that we have in our gut aren't available in little probiotic capsules. They're really difficult to get back. Modern medicine has not even identified all the different species of bacteria that we have living in our gut. So be really careful with how many times you take antibiotics. And another important thing to know is the more often you take antibiotics, the more likely you are to get serious gut dysbiosis like I have, IBS. And the majority of cases of IBS happen after a severe stomach flu for which antibiotics were prescribed. The biggest thing that naturopath doctors like to talk about with antibiotics is that as soon as you take them, you need to repopulate with prebiotics right away, because once you've wiped out your microbiome, it's a lot easier for the bad bacteria to grow, especially non-bacteria. Things like yeast, like candida yeast, doesn't always get wiped out by antibiotics. And so it now has an open playing field, just waiting for it to take over. Those were my 7 tips for taking care of bloating and pain in your gut and my understanding of basic gut health. All the things I had mentioned that needed explaining, like FODMAP diet and things like that, I will leave links in the info box below, so check those out. I've also got a couple resources for you guys if you want other YouTube channels that are more developed than mine is right now. There's Cultivate Beauty. They do a lot of gut health related videos. Sarah's Day, she is a fitness YouTuber, but she also talks a lot about holistic health, nutrition, and especially gut health. And then I've got 2 really cool videos that I found from educational channels. So we have TED Ed and then Crash Course. They have videos that are really good on just the basics of how your digestive system works, and they go into more of like the biology aspect of it. If you want to see more of my videos in the future, hit the subscribe button, it's a little red button at the bottom, and it will notify you every time I come out with a new video. If there's anything I missed, I didn't talk about, or something that you find really helpful for your gut issues or for getting rid of bloating or pain, please leave it in the comments below. I want the comment section to be like a sharing platform for us to all share your experiences, because everyone's body works a bit differently, everyone's gut works a bit differently. Bye-bye. Not sit right on. Look at this guy. Always causing trouble. Always following me. Weirdo. Isn't working. I want to put you outside, okay? Now your fur is all over the tripod.